Hi everyone, my name is Jeremy Norton-Paul and I'm the State Director of Employment and Day Services for the Tennessee Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, DIDD, which basically means that it's my job to help figure out ways for the people that our department serves to have greater access to the workforce. And so today I'm going to share with you a few minutes about some recent employment data collection efforts, what that means for us as a department, what it means for the people that we serve, and what it means for our state more broadly. By the end of these few minutes, I'm hoping to convey three main points. Number one, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about why employment. Why do we care about employment in the first place? Why is it important for us to talk about this? Number two, I want to talk about why data. Why do we care about data so much, and why is it so important that we talk about collecting it and analyzing it and using it to improve our craft? And number three, I want to share with you what we found. I want to share with you some of the results from our most recent data collection efforts. But before I do that, I'm going to do a little bit of a spoiler alert. Instead of dragging you along for a few minutes and then telling you the big, hairy, audacious goal then, I'm going to tell you what our goal is up front so you can be thinking about it while I'm talking. Our hope is that by 2022, that's 5 years from now, but it's going to fly by, that we can double the employment rate for the people that our department serves. And when we're talking about employment rate, we're talking about something called competitive integrated employment, or CIE, which means that a person is working in an integrated environment with people with and without disabilities, and that they're working for a competitive wage, which means at or above minimum wage, commensurate with their experience and other people who are doing similar jobs. So we're hoping that in the next 5 years that we're going to be able to double that rate. Now, when I say it like that, it probably sounds big, pretty ridiculous, audacious, maybe even impossible. But I'm hoping that over the next few minutes, hearing these data results and hearing me talk about this, that it seems a little bit more practical and doable. So, first, why employment? We could spend hours talking about all the different reasons why we need to be focusing on employment services for the people that we serve. However, I'm just going to spend about 30 seconds doing that. If we just run down this list, we know that employment is important from a civil rights perspective. We know that having access to the workforce, having equitable access to the workforce, is a matter of civil rights. We also know that there are various laws, pieces of legislation, Supreme Court decisions over the course of time that have made it even more important for us to be talking about this. Things like the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Olmstead versus LC Supreme Court decision of 1999, the HCBS Final Settings Rule, the list goes on. Suffice it to say, there are a lot of different legislative and legal reasons why we need to be focusing on employment. Number two, it's a win-win-win situation. We know that having a job is good for people, it's good for individuals. We know that having good employees is good for businesses and good for their bottom line. And we know that having a strong economy where businesses have employees and people are working is a win for the community. So it's a true win-win-win situation. We also know that employment is a public health determinant, which is just a fancy way of saying that the more people that are working, the healthier they are, especially when they have choice over their employment situation. We also know that when people are working, we have a stronger economy. When there are more jobs and more money being put into the system and a greater GDP and all that good stuff, we know that it's good for our state. And lastly, having a job gives us all an increased sense of independence. We know that when we're able to pay our own bills and take care of our finances and be able to save money for vacations and things like that, that it increases our degree of independence, which also means that we have less reliance on the public benefit system, which is also a win for the state of Tennessee. Now, why data? Why is it so important for us to be spending time talking about collecting data? But the fact is, we know that data is extremely important to delivering the best possible service to the people that we serve. And we know that, frankly, what gets measured gets done. By measuring something, we are essentially saying that this has value. So by measuring employment outcomes for the people that we're serving, by measuring the number of jobs that they have and the types of jobs that they have, we're saying that it's important to us to increase that number and to measure it over time. So first and foremost, what gets measured gets done. Collecting data also allows us to answer the question, how are we doing with employment? Whether it's my boss, whether it's a member of the community, whether it's the governor of Tennessee who walks into my office and says, Jeremy, how are we doing with employment? I really need to have a good answer for them because that's my job. And so having good data about the employment services that we're providing allows us to have a good answer to that question in a very succinct, quantitative way that we can share with other people. It also allows us to strategically plan, which means that when we sit down as a department and figure out the best possible way that we can deliver services to people, we have to be able to allocate resources and make decisions about what's working, what's not working, where things are going well, where things need to be improved, And if we don't have good data about our employment outcomes, we are not able to do that. So this data is going to allow us to sit down as a team and make sure that we're making the best possible decisions for Tennesseans. And lastly, this data is going to allow us to move the needle, so to speak. It's going to allow us to say, this number of people that we serve are currently having access to the workforce, and in this many years, we want that number to be even greater. So it's going to allow us to move the needle and increase the number of people who have access to jobs in Tennessee. So now I'm going to move on to the really interesting stuff, which is what we found from this data collection tool. That's always the most exciting part. And I'm just going to share some of the highlights, but if you have any questions whatsoever about this data or you want to know about something in more detail, feel free to contact me. My contact information is on the last slide of this presentation. And I'll also say that there is one slide in particular that I'm especially excited about toward the end that I think is going to help us feel really inspired and motivated to achieve that big, hairy, audacious goal that I talked about, doubling the employment rate. There's one slide in particular that is extremely exciting, so I think you'll know it when you see it. So the first slide I want to show you is the statewide employment rate. Now this is all types of employment. This isn't just competitive integrated employment. This figure includes sheltered work, it includes self-employment, it includes group or enclave work, which is when folks work in groups of between 3 and 10 together. And it also includes competitive integrated employment. So across the state, currently 25.9% of the people supported by DIDD are working, a little more than a quarter. This next slide I want to show you is when you break down that employment, this slide shows you the type of employment where people are working. So as I said a minute ago, there are a few different types of settings where someone might be working. There's competitive integrated employment, CIE. There's self-employment, where someone works for themselves or owns their own company. There's group or crew, or sometimes we call it enclave work. And then there's sheltered facility-based work, where someone is working in a segregated sheltered environment, often for sub-minimum wage or what we call piece rate. Now, if you look at this graph, you can see that actually a majority of folks who are working, 62.2%, are working in competitive integrated employment, which means that they are not only in an integrated setting working alongside people with and without disabilities, but they're also earning a competitive wage at or above minimum wage. So that's a very interesting figure to look at. And we suspect that this will change over time as more and more folks are having access to the workforce and learning about all of the advantages of being able to work in the community. We suspect this figure will increase over time. Now, this next slide breaks down the number of people who are working in competitive integrated employment. Now, this is folks who are, as I said before, working in an integrated setting alongside people with and without disabilities, earning a competitive wage. And we consider CIE to be sort of the gold standard for employment. We know that all types of employment are important, but CIE is really the gold standard for what we're pursuing. Currently, 16.6% of the people supported by DIDD are working in competitive integrated employment. And again, we suspect that that number will increase over time as more and more people have the opportunity to experience work in their communities. There's a couple of other figures that I want to share with you. We have a little bit of data about, of the folks who are currently working in competitive integrated jobs, we wanted to know how many of them had previously spent time working in a sheltered workshop setting, because oftentimes we have conversations about how shelter workshops are preparing people for employment and how there is the potential that perhaps someone who works in a shelter workshop is not quite prepared yet for competitive integrated employment. So we wanted to know some figures about this. And what we found was that almost 28% of the folks who are working in competitive integrated employment had previously been employed in a shelter workshop. And actually the average amount of time that they had spent working in those workshops was almost 14 years, 13.8 years. So that means more than a quarter of the people that DIDD serves who are now working in a competitive integrated job had previously been working in a sheltered workshop setting for about 14 years, but they're now working out in the community, earning a competitive wage. From this data, we also know that folks are on average working about 40 hours a month, which comes out to about 10 hours a week, and they're earning on average $8.17 an hour, which is just about $1 more than the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. Now, if we're zooming in on the data about the folks who are not currently working, it's interesting for us to see the different reasons why someone has not yet had that opportunity to work. So if we take a look at this slide, we can see that about half, 48.3% of people, are making the individual choice not to work currently. About 10.5% of people are currently looking for a job, so we're hoping that they have luck soon in landing a job. About 22.3% of people cite health as the reason why they're not currently working. And about 16.2% of people cite their family or conservator as the main reason why they're not able to pursue employment at this time. Now, if we take a look at ISPs, basically the plan that outlines a person's goals and aspirations for the next year, one of the things that we can look at is how many of the people who are not working have a goal related to acquiring a job. And from this data, we know that about 19%, so about 1 in 5 people who is not employed currently has a goal related to gaining a job. Now, this is the slide I was telling you about, the one that makes me most excited, because if you think back to that big, hairy, audacious goal of doubling the employment rate in 5 years, you might be telling me, Jeremy, that's ridiculous. There's no way that we can double the employment rate in 5 years. That just sounds totally outrageous and undoable. But let's take a look at this slide. On the left, we can see that the statewide rate for competitive integrated employment, and remember, that's the gold standard of employment that we're looking for, is 16.6%. Now, if we double that figure, 16.6%, we get to about 33% competitive integrated employment. And you might still be thinking that's ridiculous, that's outrageous, it's not possible. But then you take a look at the right-hand side of the slide. And from the Tennessee State Report from NCI from 2014 and 2015, they do this every year, there is a survey question that more or less says, if you don't have a paid job in the community, do you want one? So basically, do you want to work if you're not working? And we found through that survey that 36% of people who are unemployed say that they want a job as soon as tomorrow. Take a look at these two figures side by side. And if we just focus on helping those people, the people they say they want to work, if we focus on helping them get connected with jobs over the next 5 years, that 36%, you slide that over to the left-hand side of the slide, and what does that do to our employment rate? It more than doubles it. So on one hand, we know from this NCI survey that 36% of people who are not working say that they are ready to work tomorrow. We also know through business surveys that a vast majority of businesses in the Tennessee community are open to hiring Tennesseans with disabilities, and at the end of the day, just want to hire good employees. So we have people who want to work, and we have businesses who want to hire them. So it's incumbent upon us to hold up the mirror and ask ourselves, what are we doing to help connect those folks with jobs? What are we doing to help support them in living their most fulfilling life possible and pursuing their aspirations? So take another look at this slide. The current competitive integrated employment rate is 16.6%. And we ask ourselves, what is it going to take for us to double that rate to about 33%? So we look out there and we know that there are lots of folks out there who want to work. And we also know that there are lots of businesses out there in Tennessee who want to hire good employees, including those who have disabilities. So we know that that goal of doubling our employment rate is very possible. So now coming back full circle to that big, hairy, audacious goal I told you about a few minutes ago, that by 2022, 5 years from now, we're going to double the employment rate of the people served by DIDD. At first, you might have thought that that was totally undoable and outrageous and impossible, and I admit it does sound a little outrageous, but let's break down the numbers a little bit. So because we have this data, we're able to perform some analysis to show you that this is a very practical and doable goal if we all work together. So there are currently 896 people supported by DIDD who are working in competitive integrated jobs. So doubling that number would bring us to 1,792 jobs among the folks that we support. So if we would like to add 896 competitive integrated jobs over the next 5 years, what would that mean? Well, if we divide that by 5 years, that comes to 179 jobs per year. If we take those 179 jobs per year and divide those among the 111 supported employment providers in our network, that comes out to 1.6 net jobs per provider per year. So that means that job retention aside, if each of our providers is able to help between 1 and 2 people per year get a job in a competitive integrated environment, and they can do that for 5 years, that we will collectively meet our goal of doubling the employment rate in 5 years. It's that simple, 1.6 net jobs per provider per year. We know we can do it. So the big question is, what role will you play? Whether you're a state agency official, a provider, a direct support professional, a community member, an advocate, a self-advocate, a family member, a business leader, there is a role for you to play. And if you're not sure what your role is, but you're interested in learning more about your role, feel free to give me a call or email, and I'd be happy to talk with you about ways that you can help us pursue our goal of doubling the employment rate in 5 years. So in closing, I would just say that a data collection tool is just a data collection tool unless you do something important with it. And what we're excited about is that this new employment data collection tool is allowing us to take information about the people that we support and the providers in our network and doing something impactful with those numbers, which means being able to, number one, establish an accurate baseline to understand where we currently are, and to answer that question, how are we doing with employment? And number two, it also allows us to highlight success areas, because we know that all across the state, there are lots of folks who are working, that are successfully employed in competitive integrated jobs and being supported by providers in our network. So we want to identify and highlight those success areas and figure out what are they doing well so that we can replicate those successes in other areas. Having this data also allows us to identify areas of need and channel attention and resources to those areas of need. Having this data also allows us to set ambitious goals, as we've done here today, so that we can pursue those goals and take this data and use it to inform our strategic decision making. And lastly, having this data allows us to track our progress over time so that we can tell the story about our journey and know that from year to year that we are making strides to help more people access jobs in their community. And so, lastly, here is my contact information. As I said, my name is Jeremy Norton-Paul. I'm the State Director of Employment and Day Services for DIDD. My email address is jeremy.norton-paul@tn.gov, and my phone number is 615-210-4830. Feel free to contact me, and I'd be happy to talk with you more. Thanks so much for your time.